For our next story, let me begin with a folk tale about a hen that laid golden eggs. Maybe you've heard it before. Once upon a time, a farmer had a hen. It laid a golden egg every day. The farmer assumed that the hen must contain a lump of gold inside its body. So he killed the hen, but he found no gold. And this is what he was left with: no gold and no daily golden egg. That's the story. Now imagine a twist. The farmer has a dead hen and he starts ticketing people to come and see it, to see the dead hen. He starts charging people so they can witness the corpse of a bird that was once lucrative. I know it sounds grim and odd, but that's exactly what's happening in Afghanistan, except here, instead of a golden hen, it's Buddhist statues. And instead of the farmer, it is the Taliban, the terrorist group that now rules Afghanistan, the Taliban. Let me show you what they're up to. These are the great Buddhas of Bamiyan in Afghanistan. They were priceless artifacts, thought to be the two biggest standing Buddhas on the planet. They awed travelers across the world for 15 centuries. Some 800 years ago, they survived the wrath of Genghis Khan. They managed to withstand his cannon fire, but what they could not manage to survive was the Taliban. Taliban founder Muhammad Omar declared the Buddhas false gods. He said these idols have been gods of the infidels. And this is what followed. The Taliban destroyed these statues in 2001, bit by bit, with hammers, with spades, with explosives, ignoring pleas from all over the world. And this cemented the Taliban's image on the world stage as uncompromising extremists. Now the Taliban are back in power and the Bamiyan Buddhas are gone. Only two gaping holes remain, but the statues once stood. And you know what the Taliban now say? The Buddhas should not have been bombed. The Taliban are calling them an important part of Afghanistan's cultural heritage. They're inviting tourists to Bamiyan and selling tickets to visit the bombed site. For Afghans, the price is 58 cents. For foreigners, it's $3.45. Quite the shift, right? The golden question is why, and the simple answer is the golden hen. I'll explain. Afghanistan is one of the least developed countries in the world. Its economy continues to deteriorate. It faces international sanctions. It is losing humanitarian aid. It needs money desperately. And it sees the remains in Bamiyan as a potential source of revenue. The golden hen, even dead, can be lucrative. But are people actually buying it? The Taliban government thinks so. Last year, it says some 200,000 registered tourists visited Bamiyan. They spent an average of $57 each, and Bamiyan is one of the poorest regions in the impoverished country. So this seems like a decent deal, but apparently it's not good enough, because these Buddha cavities receive mainly two types of visitors. Some are Taliban soldiers themselves stationed nearby, others are educated urban Afghans, mostly still angry at the Taliban. What the regime wants is to draw cultural enthusiasts and archaeologists from abroad. Can they pull it off, though? It's hard to say at this point. The Taliban may want to position themselves as the champions of culture and make some money off it. But drawing foreign tourists will be a challenge. Now some news from West Asia. Two sworn enemies are holding talks, secret ones. The United States and Iran. Reports say their officials met in Oman last month. They held indirect talks, meaning they were not face-to-face. Oman was ferrying the messages between both sides. But what was the discussion about? The Iran nuclear deal. Joe Biden promised to revive it after becoming president. He tried for close to 1 year, but he failed miserably. So now he's trying again. He's up for re-election next year. He's also under pressure from the Israelis. They are threatening to strike Iran unless the nuclear program is paused. So what does Joe Biden do? Try to secure an informal deal, sort of like a mini agreement. Now the semantics are important here. A formal nuclear deal will have to be ratified by the US Congress. And right now that looks unlikely. American lawmakers do not want to make any concessions to Iran. They're also accusing Tehran of arming Russia. So Congress is no-go, which is why the White House is playing it safe. They're talking about, quote-unquote, an understanding or an informal deal, something that won't need Congress approval. Listen to this spokesperson of the State Department.
We continue to use diplomatic engagements to pursue all of these goals in full coordination with our allies and partners. But as I said yesterday, with respect to Iran's nuclear program, there is no deal. The reports that there are a deal or some agreement or some other description, however you want to describe it, are not true. Sorry to retread ground.
Pretty vehement, almost as if by design, but multiple reports suggest otherwise. They quote US and Iranian officials confirming that a deal is indeed in the works. Some in Tehran are calling it a political ceasefire. So what's in it for both sides? Well, the US is hoping that Iran will pause uranium enrichment. 90% is weapons-grade uranium. Iran is at 60%. The informal deal could keep it there at 60%. Iran may also release American citizens detained in the country, and Biden would love that before elections. Him at the tarmac receiving Americans released from Iran. Perfect campaign photo. The deal could also see Iran stopping its attacks on US contractors in Syria. And what do they get in return? The Iranians. Broadly speaking, they're asking for three things: sanctions relief to sell oil, unlocking of frozen assets, and stopping the seizure of their oil tankers. And some of this, by the way, is already happening. Last week, Iran paid $2.7 billion, Iraq rather, paid $2.7 billion to Iran. Now, Baghdad owed this money for buying gas and electricity. The purchases are old, but the payment came only last week. Why is that? Because sanctions were preventing Iraq from paying Iran. Last week, the Americans waived some of it, so Baghdad could finally pay up. Similar payments were also held up in South Korea, or are held up in South Korea. Seoul owes about $7 billion to Iran, and that too is now on the table. But how close are we to securing this deal? Some Israeli officials called it imminent, but we've heard that before. In 2021, there was a lot of chatter about the nuclear deal. European officials kept saying it was only days away. In the end, nothing happened. This time, President Biden faces even more challenges. The chairman of the US Foreign Affairs Committee has written to him. He says any agreement must be submitted to the Congress, even informal ones. So chances are there could be a legal showdown. And Iran is wary of that, because what's happening now is like a déjà vu. In 2015, Iran placed their trust on the White House. They signed the nuclear deal. The next year, another president came to office and he walked out of the deal. Now there is another attempt, and just like 2015, this is an election year in America. And who is likely to challenge Joe Biden? The same president who walked out of the deal, Donald Trump. More than enough reason to be concerned. But for Biden, even an informal deal is big. He's losing most of his allies in West Asia. And Israel is among the few remaining. If they feel that the US is not doing enough, they could go rogue, maybe even strike Iran themselves. So Joe Biden needs to get this right, because who knows, maybe he won't have a chance after next year. Our next story begins with some interesting pictures. Look at these. These are Chinese students. They've just graduated. And what do students typically do on graduation day? Well, they celebrate, among other things, but not these Chinese students. Look closely at them. They appear unhappy. One of them is lying on the ground, another is throwing her degree in the dustbin. And there are many such photographs doing the rounds of dejected-looking students. You may ask why, and we'll tell you. Why are so many Chinese students unhappy? Because they face a difficult future. Unemployment in China is at a record high. The numbers came out yesterday. We told you about them. More than 20% of the youth in China is unemployed. That's close to 6 million workers. Now add these graduates to the list. Do you know how many students are graduating this year in China? More than 11 million. They're entering a gloomy job market. I'm sure some of them will find jobs, even good ones, but not all of them. There are 6 million unemployed workers already looking for a job in the very same market, so it won't be easy, and the students know this. They've started a trend. It's called lying flat. It's a lifestyle trend. It's adopted by young Chinese workers frustrated with the daily struggles of modern life. What does lying flat mean? Adopting a more passive lifestyle, not buying homes or cars, not getting married, not having children, and in some cases resorting to extreme measures like this one. This young man went to the London School of Economics. Now he's out on the streets of China offering political science consulting services to anyone who can pay. We cannot confirm when or where this picture was taken. It shows the graduate with a placard in Mandarin. And this is what it says: postgraduate from LSE providing political science consulting services, knowledgeable of Russia, Ukraine, modernization theory, populism, identity politics, the neoliberal dilemma. Taxi drivers, 10% discount. Other political science students, 10% extra charge. It's an interesting pitch, you have to say. He may or may not find takers, but he's made it to the news. But not everyone can hustle like this. So some have decided to stay in college. They're choosing to fail their exams. This is according to a survey conducted by a Chinese newspaper. Graduates were asked a simple question: do you know someone who has delayed their graduation by failing the exam? Do you know what the result was? Nearly 75% of the students replied with a yes. Some students refused to attend classes. Others turned off their phones on the day of the exam. And yet others deliberately flunked the exam. For what joy? To remain in college for one more year, because life after college can be scary and the prospect of a job is dim. Also, China is an extreme case. Its economy has stagnated due to poor policies, and new graduates are paying the price for this. But what about the rest of the world? How does the global job market look? Tough. Do you know how many new jobs will be created this year? Just 3 million. That's an increase of just 1% from 2022. Leading economies are reporting high rates of unemployment, like the Eurozone, France, Italy, Brazil, Turkey, Spain, South Africa. The unemployment rate in all of these places is above 6%. So the jobs crisis is a global story. India too is struggling. The unemployment rate is around 8%, and that's not even the most worrying number. 40% of Indians are below the age of 25. As of December 2022, almost half of them were unemployed. India's population recently surpassed China, so more jobs are an urgent need, not just for the sake of the future of the youth, but also for the social stability of the country. Meanwhile, in South Asia, there's a major storm, Cyclone Biparjoy. It made landfall yesterday. This was in Western India. Biparjoy is a Bengali word. It means disaster or calamity. Thankfully, in this case, the damage was not as much as it could have been. Although 2 people have died and 23 are injured. This was in the Indian state of Gujarat. But like I said, it could have been much worse. The cyclone is still around, but it's in a reduced state. It's now being classified as a cyclonic storm, the lowest in the 5-category system. It will continue to cause heavy rains, but the wind speeds have reduced, and this has allowed cleanup work to begin. Here's a report.
Yesterday, India and Pakistan were on high alert. A cyclone approached the western Indian state of Gujarat, Cyclone Biparjoy. It made landfall last evening, but its fury was mostly concentrated on trees and infrastructure. That's because authorities were prepared. India had evacuated over 100,000 vulnerable people from Gujarat's coastal regions. Pakistan moved about 82,000 people to safety, and it helped. In India, the loss of life was limited.
2 people died before the landfall, which is sad news. However, the preparations for the cyclone proved helpful as there were no casualties after the landfall. At least 24 animals have died and 23 people have sustained injuries. But there has not been any loss of lives after the landfall. The electricity supply has been disrupted in about 1,000 villages.
The 2 people who died were shepherds. They tried to protect their flock from the rough seas and torrential rains. Sadly, they died trying to save their animals. This was a while before Cyclone Biparjoy made landfall. No deaths have been reported since. However, the cyclone has left a trail of destruction in its wake. Buildings have collapsed, trees have been uprooted, vast swathes of land are flooded, and about 4,600 villages in Gujarat are without electricity. That's due to the cyclone's winds knocking out power lines. The winds also caused a fire at a major port. It caused a stockpile of coal to ignite, sending embers and smoke over the Okha port. But the worst seems to be over, and cleanup operations have begun.
The number of tree falls in Mandvi have risen. Yesterday, only a few small structures collapsed, but judging by the wind speed, the damage might be worse today.
The cyclone hasn't dissipated yet. It's still around, but in a weakened state. Before making landfall, it was categorized as a very severe cyclonic storm. Now it's being labeled a cyclonic storm. The severity has subsided. The wind speeds have reduced, but it'll continue to bring moderate to heavy rains wherever it goes.
Moving northeastward, the cyclone will be centered toward South Rajasthan and North Gujarat on June 16 evening, and it will then weaken and turn into a depression.
And it seems the cyclone mostly affected India. Pakistan was mostly spared. Life there is returning to normal.
By the grace of God, the cyclone has passed and there are no more threats. So people have started fishing again and coming back to normal life. Also, people are coming back to their homes.
The last cyclone to hit this part of South Asia caused about 100 deaths. This was Cyclone Taukte in 2021. A cyclone in 1998 killed over 1,000 according to official figures. It seems this time authorities have learnt from the past and managed to restrict the human cost.
And before we wrap, here's something that I want to share with you. Next week is going to be special. We are going to bring you special episodes of Vantage from the US as we cover Prime Minister Modi's state visit to America. Don't miss that. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Some 2,500 South Korean and American troops took part in joint exercises marking the 70th anniversary of the alliance between the two nations. Swedish climate activists put red handprints on Claude Monet's painting. Tourists in an Australian park were filmed fighting off a feisty kangaroo. And finally, what makes the 16th of June significant? Taking you back in history to the year 1976. When the Soweto uprising took place in South Africa, police brutally attacked thousands of protesting school children, and this incident marked the beginning of the end of the apartheid system. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on Monday from the US.
F-15K 전투기 편대가 MK-80는 원거리에서 통제하여 은밀하게 적을 타격 시 직접 수불 및 공중 폭파 등 다양한
Situationen är akut. Pandemin var ingenting jämfört med klimatkollapsen, det som kommer kan vi inte ens föreställa oss. Som sjuksköterska kommer jag kunna ge er någon trygghet. Det kommer också drabbas av svält, vattenbrist, konflikter.
Helen! This is a lady.